Ladies and gentlemen, fellow residents, welcome to the first Saturday Morning Live of 2026. We're glad to keep the program going, and we have a great program for you now. To introduce our speaker, I imagine there are several, if not more, people here who know her already, but they know her from the television screen, because she is seen often introducing with a good colleague something special that you can get from WETA if you're willing to make a donation. And she's very good at taking money out of your pocket, but she's so much more than that. Her job at WETA has been there many years. I won't count them, but it's been a while. She is now a vice president for external affairs, which puts her in the middle of issues that we care about, and I know she will talk about, that we have to deal with extreme budget cuts from federal money in our public broadcasting program. We have issues of free speech that is a part of what's going on, and free speech is going to matter a lot during the months ahead as we move towards the midterm elections. We're seeing media, radio stations across the country don't have the money to operate, and there are steps that I think we'll hear about. There's consolidation of the media where fewer people are presenting the news to us. There's that and more, and I see I'm talking too much because these are your issues, Mary. Please, the floor is yours. Please come.
Thank you, John, and I'm glad to see many friends here from Grace Church or who I've known in the community. I am not going to do a pledge drive spot today because I don't have on a ton of makeup, which they usually put on, and because that's not my day job at WETA. I've been there almost 40 years because I've never been bored. Like, we're making a film about Reconstruction, and then we're switching to classical music, and then another issue comes up. And it has continued to be a place where I'm learning something new every day. And maybe you feel that way too if you are watching or listening. What I wanted to do today is talk with you about what public broadcasting is, because it can be a bit confusing with all these different entities, what's been going on recently in terms of our funding, but also like what the future is and what questions you might have about what we could or should be doing. So I'm going to give a presentation, and we're going to have plenty of time for questions, and I welcome them, I want them, and if you don't ask them, I'll just have to ask my own questions of myself, which I know you're wondering who my favorite mystery detective is, and it's always Detective Foyle. How many? Yeah. I watch that over and over. It turns out the same every time, but that's okay. I do like to know how familiar my audience is with public broadcasting. So how many of you watch something on WETA PBS or Maryland Public Television, but you watch some? Whew. Okay. And do you listen to classical WETA? Excellent. It makes you smarter, wiser, and kinder. Well, I'm going to just see if you know the faces. I inconveniently made these all black and white, so I wouldn't reveal the age of these photographs. But here are 6 people. Does anyone know what they might have in common? Yeah.
Hosting the NewsHour.
Yes? Okay. So these are the only 6 people who have ever been the anchors of the NewsHour. The MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. You see from, this is Jim Lehrer. this is what he looked like every single day, on the phone, in shirt sleeves, former Marine, get the job done, put the news on. Robin McNeil, gentleman from New York, gentleman journalist, two guys who set the standard of excellence and rigor in news journalism. And of course, on the far right, Judy Woodruff, still the hardest working woman in journalism. She comes to WETA every day when she's not traveling the globe and still contributes to the NewsHour. She and Gwen Ifill, the late Gwen Ifill, were co-anchors, and Gwen was exactly what you thought. She was smart, warm, filled with joy, and filled with the idea that young people should think journalism is an honorable profession. And now we have Jeff Bennett and Amna Nawaz. They look young to me because they're not Judy and Gwen, but they are great reporters who are also out in the field all the time. They've got flak jackets in their closet because they could be called away at any time. Having two anchors means that we can send one reporter out and one is anchoring. So thank you for getting that one right. This one's really hard. How many of you watch WETA UK, the all British and Australian and other channel? Okay. This actress you've seen on a lot of things, but she's a chameleon. Recognize her from anything? Pardon? She's not from New Zealand, but that's close. Well, she's in almost everything because evidently in England they have a shortage of actresses. This is Keeley Hawes, who just finished a run as Miss Austen, Cassandra Austen, Jane's sister. And she's been in the Durrells, and she was in Spooks, and she's married to Mr. Darcy, Matthew McFadden. But for those of us who love the British shows, seeing these actors pop up again in something where and she was also in Vicar of Dibley, and I understand you had that book author here recently. But she was a blonde at that point, so that's why we didn't recognize her. But that's not what we're mostly here to talk about today. I'd like to, skip back a little. I'd like to get to the central question you probably want to ask me, which is why are there so many acronyms? What are all these organizations? I don't know PBS from CPB from MPT. And the reason there's so many names here is that public broadcasting is a collaborative enterprise across this country, rooted in local communities. That's not quite the way it is many other places in the world. This is a map of the public broadcasters around the world. You'll see, well, some of you have lived and worked in some of these countries, right? That there are public broadcasting entities throughout the world. Some are state influenced, some are funded by the state, but not state controlled, BBC. And some, PBS, are not controlled by the government, but are supported by and accountable to the public. And that is a very different model that we have here. Public broadcasting did not start as something that the government started. It started with community leaders creating these stations. And evidently it was a good idea, because here's what it looks like now. There are PBS stations across the country in communities, serving areas that have no other local media, places that no longer have newspapers, that don't have any other local television channels. Public radio has even more stations because a radio station is more geographically challenged. So this is a picture of all the public radio stations. And I didn't show you some really important states for public radio, like Alaska, that has the most public radio stations of any state because it's really hard terrain. and a radio station needs to get over the mountains and down the valleys. But in most of Alaska, that is the only broadcast media that reaches any citizen. So I want to take a step back and look at how did we get to this complex, wonderful system. In the 50s, people started thinking, this television thing, this new thing, is great at selling silly stuff to people and doing silly shows. And Newt Minow, who was chairman of the FCC at the time, said, television is a vast wasteland. And it was he working with other luminaries who said, we need public broadcasting. We need to use media that's designed to serve, not sell the public. But the government didn't invent it. Local people did. This is part of the Great Society era, when Wolf Trap was founded, when lots of educational institutions were founded, when civic associations really boomed, and I hope somebody will ask me later more about the Great Society era. The idea was that these be local stations. We are not a network. We're not like ABC or Fox or NBC, where the network is making the content, sending it out to the little affiliates. We're the reverse of that. We're a whole bunch of member stations who collaborate. Some are pretty big stations like WETA, but we share the programming with each other. And PBS and NPR are just organizations at their outset that help us share. In NPR's case, they actually then evolved into producing news programming, but PBS doesn't produce anything. They're a big sharing house. They're a big central library. That's the reason why you have so many stations, because they were licensed to educational entities. So to a university like WAMU has a radio station that's licensed to American University. WHUT is a television station that's licensed to Howard University. The licensing also allowed to be licensed to a state. So Maryland Public Television is licensed to the state of Maryland. I grew up in South Carolina. South Carolina television, the only thing I was allowed to watch as a kid by my strict mommy. And then WETA, which is the third kind of license, you were allowed to be licensed to the community. So we don't belong to a state, we don't belong to a university, we are licensed to serve the greater Washington community. We like that. But you need somebody to organize this. So in our case, it was a very gracious and tough woman named Elizabeth Campbell. Anyone here know the Campbell family? She started thinking about WETA when she was 58, and she continued to work there without pay until she was 101. And I was fortunate enough to get to know her because I've been there a while. The Campbells were do-gooders. They promoted parks, they promoted schools, they helped build St. Mary's Church. And that was born out of their feeling that we should create a society that was more accessible to all. Free public parks, free education. Mrs. Campbell was the first woman on the Virginia School Board at a time when that was very challenging. And she was fighting to integrate the schools. And ultimately it was her husband who argued the case to integrate to the Supreme Court for Virginia. So the idea that we needed to increase access to educational programming and to use this new thing of television for good was really born out of a sense of public service. It's still what we're after. She was also just the most tenacious person I've ever met, with such a smile, including Mary, you should not wear patent after Labor Day. So we went on the air in 1961 with a show called Time for Science, and in 1970 with with our radio station, which was sort of a mixed format, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And we are still in Arlington, though the station has, in its early years, moved around. We're in Shirlington. And if you come to Shirlington, as you surely must, please let me know, and I'll take you into the station and show you it. It's great to be welcomed by Arlington. Mrs. Campbell talked about public broadcasting as being a place that creates educational access for all, not creates educational stuff that only a few people can get. The idea of reaching everybody was essential. And I'm going to come back to that because it's easy to imagine a model where public broadcasting could become a club, where only the people who really like it pay for it, and we only make stuff for those people. And that's not public access and education for all. That we be guided by public service, not profits, not politics. That we protect our editorial independence, something we do need to talk about. That we empower civic engagement, the idea that we aren't just showing you what's comfortable, we're showing you something new. Let me see a different point of view. Let me see a different part of the world. Let me dive into a subject I never knew I'd be fascinated by. I'm not a big nature and Nova watcher, but occasionally I do turn that on. I think, oh, wow, I didn't know that before. I just learned something fast. And that you expand horizons, that it's not just self-reinforcing. That's our DNA. So who are we today? Your public television station and radio station, WETA, is now the second largest producer of content for PBS across the system. We have 5 television channels. We have 2 radio channels, both classical music. We produce the NewsHour. We own the NewsHour. We are the NewsHour. People running around the building are the NewsHour. Their vibe is a little different. Like, they've got to be on the air that night. People developing programs with Ken Burns are working on a 10-year project. They're just different biorhythms, right? And what you don't see as much when you're just watching us on the air or listening to us is we've got a deep educational resource commitment. Every Ken Burns program that you see has lesson plans for kids from 6 to 12. Every Skip Gates Finding Your Roots series that you see has toolkits for teachers to use it in the science classroom and the social studies classroom. We have deep websites to help teachers learn to teach, adults who have struggled with literacy, and a different website for those who are working with teens. I don't see a lot of toddlers in the room, but most people think of public broadcasting as children's programming, and we are still the place the majority of kids are learning to read. Most kids are not in preschool, and they're using television as that tool. In fact, most of our viewers are under age 5. But then they grow up, and the new ones come in. Our steadiest viewers are right here. So that's what WETA is today. We are between $120 and $140 million a year company. That variation is whether we're doing a big production like the American Revolution or whether it's a more steady year. And about $45 million of that is producing the NewsHour. Producing news is very expensive. You're making a news show every night. You have reporters around the world. You have lots of layers of editorial and fact-checking steps. That's not a shortcut. That's a necessity. And tomorrow you have to make the whole program again. It's not evergreen. You can go back and watch Ken Burns' Civil War, and it's still watchable. The news from a year ago is a history book. Okay, so that's sort of where we are. You don't need to read this slide because I'm going to tell you, but I know some people are. By the way, yes, our funding from Congress was eliminated. And I don't want to belabor it too much, but I do want to share what happened. Federal government had been funding public broadcasting as one of many forms of support that the public broadcasting stations get. The most recent amount that was funded was $535 million per year. That covered 300 public television stations and about 1,000 public radio stations. On average, that was about 15% of their budget. Okay, well, I could, maybe I can slim down by 15%, though New Year's resolutions would say not. But for a lot of the smaller stations, it's 40 or 50% of their budget. Because if you're a small radio station with 4 employees and a transmitter, most of your cost is coming from the federal government. Your community in rural Alaska or rural Mississippi or in the middle of the country isn't supporting the station, and that's why the station is there. Because it's not commercially viable to have radio and television local stations everywhere. Just a side note, just like it's not commercially viable to deliver mail to everybody. You do it as a public service. But this Congress decided to eliminate all the funds that had already been appropriated and not to appropriate any more. We fought hard, and many of you fought with us, to say the value of public broadcasting matters. And it was a very close vote. And some of those legislators have since said, oh, but I thought we were going to put you in a future appropriation. For WETA, because we're a large producing station, we had it easier than some and harder than others. The actual annual appropriation we got as a television station and radio station was $9 million. And we've lost that every year for the foreseeable future. The harder thing is the reduction across the system means that we're losing another $5 to $25 million towards production support. And that gets harder to make up. So we have had large layoffs. We've had to make some other decisions that I'll share with you today, but we've laid off about 50 people. And we're not hiring and that kind of thing. But we also had to make some programming cuts. So this weekend is the last weekend we will be producing the PBS News Weekend with John Yang. We were a 7-day-a-week news operation, bringing in technical crews and editorial teams. And that was the thing that we needed to cut. And that's super hard because the news happens on the weekends too. But that being 7 days a week was expensive. We had a news bureau in Arizona so that we could update our shows and get news from out there with Arizona State University. We've closed that. It is a challenging environment for new national productions. So when we're developing something like a Skip Gates program or a Ken Burns program, we're working 3 or 5 years out to get the funding. And formerly, PBS and CPB had programming money and could say, well, we'll cover 10% of that to get you going. Or in Ken Burns' case, when he was doing the film on World War II called The War, he wanted to interview as many veterans as possible while they were still there to tell their stories. And he got money ahead of time to go just capture the interviews. We'll raise the rest of the money later. But for filmmakers who are less well-known, even harder to get that startup money or to get that, that getting into production. So we have projects on the table about defeating dementia, about climate change, about arts and health. Renee Fleming is developing a project with you with us about the relationship between arts and our brains, which we already know because we listen to classical music. And those will take longer and be harder to fund. It's not like the foundation world will just step in. The foundation world is being stretched in every possible way as well, right? All the foundations that support education and social programs are having more hands out. We stopped some of our local productions. If you lived here and get out of town, you'll still see the reruns on the air, but we're not making new episodes in that series or the Around Town Best Bets. We are cutting back on our acquisition budget. We buy programs just for this market, and we'll have to buy fewer of those. We reduce the circulation of the WIDA magazine, so new people coming in don't get the magazine unless you ask for it, and then we will happily send it to you. So if you are not getting the magazine, please let me know, and I'll make sure you get it, because I'm the publisher of it, and it's filled with lovely things about all the things you can watch. It pains me not to send this to everybody who could possibly be interested, but it costs paper and postage. And a few other things that we are cutting. I mean, we are cutting some things that are permanent changes and then holding on to any expenses we can, because something else has been happening. Our viewers and listeners are really stepping forward. We will probably recoup half of the standard cut this year. That's because people are stepping forward with their contributions, which is wonderful for WETA. We have an unusually strong and loyal audience. You know, that's not possible for a Mississippi station or an Alaska station. And we're a big network, so WIDA will be here. If those other stations are not here, then there are fewer people contributing into that larger programming pool. And a producer who says, I want my program to be seen by everybody in the United States, doesn't want to hear, but it's only going to be airing on the coasts. So we've got some challenges ahead and some good news. Well, you all mentioned that you were particularly interested in free speech and in news. So I just want to give you a picture of the external environment. As you probably heard and maybe experienced yourself, newspapers are in steep decline, and about 130 are closing every year. Well, maybe people are just going online. That's true to some extent, that newspapers like the Atlanta Journal, which has just announced that they're not printing starting in January, are saying they're going all digital. Others, like the Pittsburgh Gazette, just announced they're going under. But if we could get all this online, maybe that's okay. But that's also not happening. Yes, there are newspapers that are becoming digital, but they tend to be on the coasts. On California, the west, the east, and that other coast, which is Chicago. And the other thing that I find sad is that these digital publications are finding declining users to news. A 40% decline of people who are going to news sites of any kind. Knowing the news is important. And having multiple sources of news is important. And having local news is important. Something that is based locally, that reports on what's happening, and that can be a resource for communities knowing what's happening. And local news is definitely the victim here, that local papers, local websites are closing quickly. And I'm just talking about every kind of news and websites. I'm not even talking about those that actually have journalists, fact checkers, editorial boards. Public television and radio was a good salve to that, because we are reaching into almost every community in the United States, and we have high penetration into what's called news deserts, places where there's nothing else. Those are exactly the stations, though, that are at most risk. So far, we know of about 15 stations that are closing or have closed. I would expect 70 or 80 to close in the next year or two. When we come back to, well, let's take a moment now. And just do a couple of questions. What does this change in news access mean for how we as a society consume what's going on and understand it? What does it mean for a democracy when that fourth estate is in decline? The news programming that you see through the networks is getting consolidated into just a few major corporations. Corporations that are apparently bowing to pressure in how they cover, because they've got to get their merger through, or they've got to retain their preferable status. So I want to just take a couple minutes here to ask some questions, hear your questions. John, will you be our mic runner?
I think they want you to keep talking.
Sally's over there too.
Okay, Jackie.
This is just a little question, but we all looked at the map that you showed, the East and West Coast. Can you tell us about the percentage of states and affiliates that are being affected in that central part of the United States?
So it's odd. Like a New Jersey station has gone down, and I went to school in New Jersey, and I see nothing middle of the country about that. But if you're not part of the New York media market, you're struggling for dollars. Mississippi, a state you know well, is in distress. The Alaska stations, I'm really concerned about, because that's how people find out that the storm is coming. You know, that's how, there are messages that go back and forth there. South Dakota, North Dakota, Nevada are struggling. So but it's not just the middle of the country. It's also smaller communities.
Mary, thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate it. Could you elaborate more about your concern of reduction of free speech?
I teach a class at Georgetown that's in the public relations department, and one exercise that I ask them to do is take a story they know well, something that happened at their own organization or something that they were promoted, and go look at 6 different outlets to see how it was treated. How did this place cover it? How did that place cover it? Did this place cover it at all? And then I ask them to do that thinking about their hometown or the smaller market that they know. I grew up in Clinton, South Carolina. There's no newspaper there anymore. I get South Carolina public television, but I don't get a diversity of local news. And if I'm getting my news just from corporate entities whose job it is to placate the stock market or their own investors, I get a really narrow point of view, and I get a narrow number of subjects. You know, we're only going to cover this thing. We're never going to cover arts or science or follow up on the story that we ran a year ago about or return to Flint, Michigan and find out what's happening with lead. I was brought up to read broadly. I couldn't watch television because my mother was not allowing that and see what happened, but I could read anything. She said, you can read any book in the house or any book in the library. and listen to a lot of voices. And I think we need to listen to a lot of voices, not just so we learn what other people are thinking, but learn what we might be missing, or try on that idea, or wonder why it's told a different way. That empowers us to be an informed community and to respect us as citizens, which was, as I understand it, the idea of free speech, that in a marketplace of ideas, you can weigh those ideas and hear those ideas. Wow, that's a crazy idea. I'm going to walk away from that one. Wow, that's a crazy idea, but a lot of people seem to believe it. I wonder why. The marketplace of ideas is what free speech allows, and without that cacophony, we can't be informed. We are only self-reinforced. There is also a chilling effect if you are afraid that covering a story or covering a story with a certain point of view will shut down your license or will incur huge FCC fines. There is a chilling effect of, should I say it? Should I cover it? Maybe this is uncomfortable. And while I encourage people to be polite and to check their facts before they speak, telling them, watch your tongue if you're saying an uncomfortable truth, is a dangerous thing for a democracy. We have mic runners over here too.
Or am I up or is he? Go ahead. Okay. Are the people who live in these communities that are about to lose their station complaining to their representatives and senators? And are those people beginning to realize what they've done to their constituents?
Yes to the former. People, the outpouring of "don't take my public media away" was incredibly strong, incredibly strong. So it was not constituent-based complaints that shut us down. Are some of the lawmakers changing their tune? You know, they've got a lot of pressure on them. They've got a lot of other things too that they're concerned about. And we did a screening of the American Revolution on the Hill in October. Already defunded. Had an event up there. Ken Burns talking about the American Revolution, about the importance of citizenry, of the pursuit of lifelong happiness, which Ken maintains the founders wrote as and interpreted as the ability to grow and learn. And there were plenty of senators there loving it and saying, please come to my state. And, oh, I didn't know you were doing education in the schools or coming here and there. My sense is that there were Senator Bacon, Senator Tillis, people who liked their public broadcasting, but it was, they found they were unable to vote for it, is how it would be expressed. And those two are stepping down.
Yeah. It's on. My impression is that people under the age of, say, 40 are drifting away from news as we used to deliver it and consume it. The networks' audiences for the news shows are declining steadily. So that raises two questions. I mean, and they're getting their news from Facebook and people like that. Yes. Yeah, news. So I have two questions. One, is that also a trend that you see in for the audience for the PBS NewsHour? And secondly, is there something that you should be doing to try to reach the people that are no longer consuming news the way we used to do traditionally?
Yes and yes. So his question was, one, are your audiences declining for broadcast news? Our broadcast viewership has been declining for not just news, but for everything else. With NewsHour, it tends to pick up during, say, election cycles or early coverage of war. But overall, our audience for the 1 hour broadcast is lower. But NewsHour now almost, and we reach about 5 million people nationally and another couple million internationally with the broadcast version. But now we have almost equal numbers of people who consume PBS NewsHour content online. They're not necessarily watching the whole show. I have a 23-year-old and a 28-year-old. I don't think they watch an hour of anything. But they would go on and look at this interview or that coverage. And we can see that we are trying to be where they are. So on YouTube, you can get PBS NewsHour. Yep. We're trying to be where those viewers are and have shorter form or pieces of the show there, because that's how they're consuming news. And we do have, I mean, it's great to go out to colleges and to hear journalism students, because there you're getting it. And we have a program called PBS Student Reporting Labs, where we train young journalists. We go out to high schools and teach the teachers. And then in the summer, we have an academy where we bring the young journalists to the station, and they get to work with Nick Schifrin on what does it really mean to cover a war. I do think there's a hunger in that generation for journalism, but they don't see the outlet for it. Where am I going to do this job? So we are trying to be where they are and in the way they watch. Let me take one or two more, and then we'll come back to this when we finish. Yes.
Okay, and that covered a lot of my questions. So, but to build on that, it seems that a lot of informational content, including news content, is being done by, and I hate this word, influencers. We can all shudder, who are not informed. I mean, I'm not going to get my health advice from some 20-year-old who goes, put it all in a blender and you'll cure cancer. But this is where people are getting the news, because all they're doing it for is money, clicks, and likes. How can you sort of combat that? It's one thing to have shortened news clips, since the attention span is shorter for the YouTube viewing portion of the public, but how do you combat something like getting all your news from influencers and certain other types of streaming media like that?
So I consume a lot of history programming, and I have learned by watching lots of history programming on PBS. This isn't a new problem. Like yellow journalism of old, or the gossip that you heard around the corner. I guess if you watch Bridgerton, you know, that gossip thing that she sends out. It's always been there. These other people who are spreading news or spreading propaganda, or self-purported people telling you what's happening in the world. That's not a different phenomenon. It's the power of it and the quickness with which it spreads that makes it very hard as a casual consumer to tell the difference, because your phone is telling you this thing happened. People were killed in this mine, and it's the fault of the people who made the pipe, long before any credible fact-based research journalism is saying so. And so part of our job is to try, as citizens, is to try to help people understand the difference between an opinion about you can drink Diet Coke and cure your cancer, evidently not true, you know, and a fact-based researched point of view. And I think what we have to do is lean into realizing we're going to be in that environment. We can't say, don't listen to influencers. We can try to say, these are people with opinions. These are people who have fact-based research stories that they have brought to you. I think part of this is a sort of cultural disaffection with expertise. There's a book called The Death of Expertise, where there is a cultural, like, I'm not going to listen to that person because they're a judge, and that's part of the old guard and I want to just listen to somebody else. I'm not going to listen to this scientist. I'm not going to listen to the doctor. I'm not going to listen to the vet because I just got better advice on my phone. And that is something that I think will take a societal push for. I mean, we are all, but especially our young people, are bombarded by information everywhere you go. You go to fill the gas tank and there's video coming at you. It's on your phone, it's everywhere. How do you sort out the wheat from the chaff? And we have to be telling people what's different about what we do, not just expecting that they will respect journalism as a profession when they equate it with my sister who writes a blog in the basement is also a journalist. It's not the same. No easy answer, except it's the reality of where we are. We have to do a better job at saying this is what you get when you come to us. Let me do. Oh, I will. You know what? Let me finish up, and we'll come back and spend more time with questions, because I'd love to talk. I'd love to know what you're interested in and talk it through. So I mentioned that we're not continuing with the PBS News Weekend. We are introducing next weekend 2 new shows in that same time slot. One is from William Brangham on the left, a reporter on the NewsHour. He's very interested in science, technology, and health. This will be a roundtable, sort of like Washington Week. What makes it less expensive for us is we're making it during the week. We're not bringing in crews on the weekend. Brand new show. Watch it. Tell us what you think. What do you want more of, less of? He is a smart guy who's willing to go to Antarctica and do pieces about penguins, or whatever one does when one goes to Antarctica. And then on Sundays, Nick Schifrin, who you may know from his war reporting, is doing a 6 p.m. show on international affairs. When we really look at the landscape, these 2 topics are not covered enough in mainstream media. Yeah, we cover a war moment, but we don't look at the general media landscape doesn't look at the context behind. And they certainly don't return to the other war that's happening in a different continent. So these, we're taking talent we already have. We're shooting it during the week. It's a roundtable, so while these reporters will continue to do their normal reporting, we're not sending them somewhere new for this. And it's more economical for us. It starts next weekend, and we need viewer feedback to figure out, do you like it? We are also deeply committed to continuing to do Washington Week with Jeffrey Goldberg and running student reporting labs, to doing excellent journalism with the same care and tenacity that Jim Lehrer and Robin McNeil did. That's part of our DNA. It does not always make us popular. It doesn't make us very commercially attractive. It is part of what we are. And we also do a lot of other things. We're the 2nd largest producer of content for the PBS system. That means we're doing the Capitol Fourth concerts and sharing that with the nation. That is our highest rated show every year. The fireworks outrate everything else. We've been production partner with Ken Burns for 40 years. He is exactly who you think he is too. Like, he wears jeans, his hair is always something, you know, and he works so hard. For American Revolution, he was on the road for 18 months. He finished the film 18 months ago, going to every state, going to France, going to Canada, going to small schools, going to battlefields, going to universities, talking about the importance of understanding our past if we're going to chart our future. Did you watch the series or some of it? Fortunately, available to you many times in the coming years on repeat or always available streaming. We are production partners with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Skip Gates, who does Finding Your Roots. I love that show. If I talk to a 30-year-old, they won't have watched a lot of PBS, but they will watch Finding Your Roots. That's a show that they love. And the idea of looking at your genealogy has all of a sudden become cool again because of him. And we do other documentaries that are not ongoing series. We did one last spring with Bradley Cooper on the caregiving crisis. So we're producing things that are 3, 5, 7 years in the pipeline. And somebody will ask me about Ken's pipeline. And in January, we have the wonderful things you, I hope, are enjoying. A new season of Finding Your Roots. All Creatures Great and Small returns. It's just what we need in January. Do any of you remember watching the older version with with Robert Hardy? Yeah, they're very different. It's surprising to me how now we have a sweeter version of it, and then it was really gritty. I can watch this one over and over and over. And Miss Scarlet has a new beau, as you may know, and she is returning in January as well. And programs like Miss Scarlet, we are, the BBC is making them, and we are partnering with them. We don't have to do all of that ourselves. Costume drama is one of the most expensive forms of television. It's really easy to do a cooking contest or a singing contest or throw people on an island and see if they survive. It's hard to do journalism. It's hard to do costume. And it's also really time-consuming to do history. If you are going to get archival footage and a lot of experts and travel to those places. So one of the casualties, unfortunately, of the federal funding is that our sister station, WGBH, is discontinuing American Experience and American Masters. And history is just very hard to make, and it takes time, but I'm sorry to see those finish up. We also will keep doing the things that we are known for doing. Our goal, back to your question, Larry, is how do we reach new audiences? Because we do find that people want the content, they just might not know where to find it. I did focus groups a while back with a bunch of 30-year-olds, and you're behind glass, and so you can't get into the room, what you really want to do, because you hear them talking and saying, yeah, I watched that guy who does the genealogy shows, but where did I watch it? And then somebody else says, do they still have PBS? Like, where do you get it? Because the idea of going to a television isn't what they do. We've got to reach those people because they want the content. When they see the content, when they experience it, they just don't locate it with us. Daniel Tiger, who you see down there in the corner, started his life as a puppet on Mr. Rogers. He now has his own animated series. He is a delightful guy who will teach you good manners and to read. Nature, there's a new show on elephants coming. For those of you who like watching big, beautiful animals, I watch all the ones on tigers and cats. Signature Dish is the one local series we'll keep making. That's where Seth Tillman goes around town, shows you what good restaurants are doing. We want to do these shows that help you celebrate this area. And we not only air classical music, we also record it, produce it, and share it. So the National Symphony Orchestra concerts that we record with our engineers are what you hear on the NSO showcase. And we have just, in June, introduced a new streaming service. By that I mean it's a place you can go online and stream anywhere, anytime. So like you might go to Amazon Prime or to Netflix, WIDA Plus is a free service where you can watch all of our channels live, or you can go watch the old episodes of All Creatures Great and Small and catch up. And we have more content there than we could ever put on our air. So we got some programs from Mount Vernon when we were working with them on the American Revolution, and we can take an old documentary and put it there, and we can have movies there that we don't have time to put on our main schedule, or that, or that are out of rights for us to broadcast. And that's a new service that I hope will help us reach people where they are. For instance, when we did the American Revolution, then we could also have a bunch of programs that were about subtopics, about the spies or the locations, or point you again to Ben Franklin, which was a Ken Burns program of a couple years ago that I think is among his very best. which is all of them are among his very best. And it also gives us opportunities to do things that are very local. Like we found a documentary about Katharine Graham, and we put it on our air, but we could air it once. We put it on our streaming service, and a lot of people watched it. So what is my take? You don't you can read it or listen. We have a loyal audience, and at WETA we have a very loyal and generous and vocal audience. Our survival will depend on whether that loyalty lasts, that loyalty and generosity. We have to keep earning it every day, and we have to be sure that what we're doing is valuable to the audience, because it's on them now. Federal funding, well, when I asked my boss, Sharon Rockefeller, she's like, we're not going to give up on this federal funding. And what we have to do first is get it back for the rural stations. West Virginia, Alaska, Mississippi. So she's a pretty determined lady too. But I don't know if it will return. It's very hard once something is gone, and you look across a number of different institutions that have been defunded, it's very hard to ever get it back because the status quo becomes, it's gone. Fact-based, deeply researched journalism still matters. Still, it's critical to a democracy. Media consumption is always changing. So I hear people saying, wow, even in our organization, viewership is down and there are all these different companies and people are doing it every different way. It must be the death of public broadcasting. Not long after I joined, I went to a staff meeting and this new internet thing was being discussed. And they were trying to explain it to us and how we would have to look up the name of an organization because there was like a paper directory of where it had the different .orgs and what could you find there. And Elizabeth Campbell, who at that point was in her 90s, was in the room. She was listening. And finally she stood up and she said, I get it. It's all about content. And we do content. This is no problem. And that was just how she took on life. Oh, right, that's true. Content is king. We just need to be sure we're connecting people to the content. There's a lot of clutter out of there. So how do we do that? And what do you want us to be? We're your public television. WETA is, and public broadcasting writ large. Belongs to the people, has to serve the people, so what do you want and need? And that might be a good place for me to stop and take questions.
Since I have the mic, I want to ask a very short question. We who are older may or may not know what streaming means. And if we don't know what it means, we don't know how to access it. Very briefly, can you do that?
Yes. So streaming means that you are getting your television shows on your computer, on your Roku, on your television when it gives you a different option, but you're not getting it from a broadcast tower that's beaming it down to you. So if you watch Netflix or Amazon Prime, you're watching streaming. And we call it streaming because, I don't know, it sounds like it flows and it's nice, but it's a different place to get your content. And one advantage of it is you can go and watch it on your time. It's sort of like somebody else has done the DVR of everything you ever wanted to watch. So for instance, if you just recently found Royal Flying Doctor Service, it's a very erudite program about really hunky Australian doctors who fly around and help people, you can watch all 3 seasons at once. Or if you want to go watch All of American Revolution or you want to watch it in 15-minute bits, you can do that. And because we're real people, we have a service desk where you can call and we will walk you through the process of getting it on your device. There are actual 3D people at my station who do that very well. In the green room, yeah.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, this question ties in pretty well with your comment about content and clutter. At least I think it does. A lot of times when I hear things, I will hear things with one set of perspective ears, and somebody else will have a different one. So I will see sometimes an interview of somebody up there, and it looks to me like that somebody is clearly diverting and telling lies and half-truths and so forth. And somebody else might think, no, that's not true. But somebody that I think is telling the truth about stuff, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. Okay, so that can happen. But a lot of times when I'm listening, it looks like the interviewers really have a lot of the questions already figured out. And sometimes it seems like those questions are structured around the kind of answers the people are going to give on the ones that I think are telling the truth. And I'm wondering, are they, when your announcer sits down, your questioner sits down ahead of time to talk with that person and says, okay, we're going to ask about this topic, does the interviewee sometimes feed questions that they want to be asked so that then the interviewer will be able to do that? And do they get that, and then they can figure out where they want to do that, or is it all more spontaneous in terms of the interviewee having to figure out, and often extremely clearly, the answer right away to the questions that are asked? That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you have an interviewer like Amna Nawaz up there talking to somebody who is to my view, is clearly trying to divert the conversation, is clearly trying half-truths, and is trying so hard to get real information out of them, how do they feel afterwards? How do they tolerate that kind of situation?
These are excellent questions, and I'll answer it in 3 ways. Do the interviewees know the question ahead of time? It depends on what we're talking about. On the NewsHour, never. But if we are doing an arts program where we are going to interview Signature Theater about their new production of Fiddler on the Roof, then probably we're going to say, I'm going to want to talk to you about your choices in casting. Because that's not a news editorial thing, it's a feature that we're creating. If Ken Burns is talking to Rick Atkinson about his books on American Revolution, he has talked to Rick for maybe 400 hours before that, but he doesn't tell him the exact questions. But Rick knows that we're going to be talking about the battles in Princeton. On a news program like ours, a strict, straight down the road news program, no, you don't know what I'm going to ask you. There is a tendency now by people who are going to be interviewed to want to set rules. Well, I'll come on your show, but I am not going to talk about X or Y or Z topic. We do not accept that condition, but many outlets do. All right, you only want to talk about this and not that? Okay, we won't ask about that. We don't accept that. Makes it harder for us sometimes to get the person to come. But that's a ground rule you just can't abide by if you really are trying to represent the people who are watching, which is what we're trying to do. That being said, I invited you for a reason. You're former Secretary of State, and I'm inviting you to comment on this new thing that's happening in Ukraine. I'm probably not going to be asking you your opinion on the new dietary guidelines. But they do not know the questions ahead. So you're right, some of those people are incredibly articulate being able to turn. Jim Lehrer used to say it's not his job, Jim's job, to call a lie, or to hammer the person. It's the viewer's job, and his job is to ask the question, and if the person squirms or lies, our viewers will recognize it. Other journalists feel like they should be pushing back more. Clarify that more. Did you really mean that more? And that's a difference between different journalists. How do they feel afterwards when they get spun? I hope they can know that they've done their best, and that in the end, we're the viewers watching and thinking, he will not answer that question, will he? But also, you're not going to invite that person back much because the goal is to get information. It is hard, I think, and sometimes, they've got 20 questions that they wanted to get through, and the interviewee goes over here. But if you're a good journalist, you need to go over there and bring them back, not just have two people who are talking about two different things. Interviewing is so much harder than it looks. Yeah.
I have a microphone.
Would you like to ask your question?
I have a question. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, but I'm not sure where you are in the room. Can you?
I'm right here.
Okay, there you are.
What is the difference, if there is one, between WIDA Plus and PBS Passport?
And I know it's confusing, and I'm sorry. WIDA Plus is available, and the content is free for the majority of the content. If you want the backlog, the things that are the archive, some of those materials are behind a paywall, and so you would have to pay a membership level to get behind there. So for instance, everything we air is free to the public for at least 6 weeks, in some cases for 6 months. But a show that's 5 years ago that actually belongs to the BBC would be at the PBS Passport level. It's sort of like a free circulation in the library or something that you have to pay for to request.
What are the implications of the current situation on WETA classical radio?
Well, on classical radio, we did make some changes. We no longer run NPR news breaks, and that was partly a financial decision because we were paying NPR dues with our federal funds were part of that. And that was partly a listener decision because listeners told us they didn't like getting interrupted. Their classical music experience, they did not like getting interrupted with news. If they wanted that, they could go over to AMU. And that's the main difference. We also automated a little more, so they're live announcers there most of the time, but between midnight and 6, we've reduced the number of hours that we have live people there. They're they're always live when they're there.
Thank you. My question goes all the way back to the beginning when you talked about how your federal funds were cut. I'm sure you've been back to find out why that happened, and I am going to assume it's one political party over the other, but we won't go into that. But how do you get that money back from the government? Because otherwise you guys are running, a very skinny performance.
I should say that the Virginia delegation was.
Yeah, they're great. They're great.
My particular boss met with 31 different members of Congress. Many of them, like Dick Durbin, very supportive. Don Bacon, very supportive, but didn't vote for it in the end. Tom Tillis, supportive, didn't vote for it in the end. People who are coming, and many of those people are retiring. I do think we need to get it back by saying, first and foremost, fund those rural stations. And a whole piece I haven't even mentioned because it's not as visible is public stations across the country have emergency public safety infrastructure that helps us all. Emergency test systems. In this area during 9/11, when towers went down, we could still broadcast and connect the police to the fire station. That emergency infrastructure is something that I think in a less politically charged moment, some of those legislators might support, and that would be a step back. But it's a long step, and for many things.
Mary,
Yeah.
Mary, could you kindly give us a preview of what's coming with Ken Burns? You said you work with him 3 to 5 years out.
Well, a normal producer, you work 3 to 5 years out. Ken has a 10 to 20-year pipeline. And he's got this many ideas. But it sort of ties to my saying what somebody asked me also about the Great Society. Ken is further out working on a documentary, some number of hours, on Lyndon Baines Johnson. And I think that's going to be fascinating because, wow, what a complicated figure at a really complicated part of our history. And I mean, that intersects with his film on Vietnam. It intersects with his deep interest in race relations in America and in this idea of building, a great society, which was so much part of that. And so I'm thrilled he's doing that. He also has several filmmakers that he works with where he's the executive producer, which means he's in the edit room, but he's not the one out filming. In March, we will see a relatively short documentary on Henry David Thoreau. You can think of him as a radical, or you can think of him as somebody who loved nature. He was a radical. So that I think will be a great one. He has other filmmakers he works with who are making a series that's maybe a year and a half out on crime and punishment in America. The film he did on Leonardo da Vinci, he did with a great filmmaker named Sarah Burns, who, yes, is his daughter. And so those are his immediate ones in the pipeline. He has long wanted to make a film about Martin Luther King. It is very difficult to get the rights from the family and the permissions from the family. The family would like the story told a certain way. That sort of goes back to your question in green. Ken will not accept conditions. So if he's going to make a film about Martin Luther King, he needs access, and he's going to tell the story, and he's not going to be like, hey, tell the story, but don't tell the uncomfortable parts. One more question? Yes.
I just wanted to vouch what you said for what you said about what kind of questions you ask. Whether I've been a guest on PBS NewsHour 5 or 6 times because I happen to know a lot about women in the military. And what the process is, usually you'll talk to the producer who'll call you to see if you're available and talk in generally about what you know, what you don't know. The person who's actually doing the interview, you usually don't even know who that's going to be until there you are. Sometimes it's live, sometimes they tape it just a little bit before they go on. But I have never been told what I was going to be asked at all. And
who was interviewing you?
Well, Judy Woodworth has, and various others. It's been over time. Some who are no longer there, but it's absolutely, you go on and you better know how to answer whatever question may come up.
Thank you. Fact-based research to verify. Yeah. Okay, so I'm happy to stay around, but I think we've concluded our time. I'll stay up here with any questions. I do, let's see. That's my email. So you can email me if you later have a question. And
Mary, before you leave.
Yes.
You've given us a master class in the issues in front of public broadcasting. We are so lucky that you would come and talk to us. Thank you.
You're welcome.